High above the glowing mantle of Lumina Prime, the spire of radiance offered no shadows to hide in. The faint, rhythmic hum of the spire of radiance's atmospheric cyclers pushed sterile, perfumed oxygen into the vast audience chamber. It was too pristine, entirely lacking the familiar metallic grit of Terra Nova's stations. Archon Malachur stood upon the raised dais. His luminescent skin pulsed in slow, arrogant waves of violet and gold, a biological broadcast of absolute superiority. Beside him stood Princess Astria. Her head was bowed. Her own luminescence was deliberately dimmed to a shameful, slate-gray flicker, barely visible beneath the heavy, ceremonial silks draped over her shoulders. Malachur's voice resonated through the acoustic dampeners, offering a gift to the Terran delegation. A permanent diplomatic bridge. Marriage to royal blood. Commander Elias Thorne stood at the base of the quartz steps, his dress uniform feeling constrictive across his chest. He watched the way Malachur's secondary gill slits flared. It was a physiological tell for barely concealed amusement. This wasn't a gesture of unity. It was an insult draped in velvet. Astria was the Lemurian Council's discarded secret. She was a Barren royal, a genetic failure according to their flawless Protocol 15. Gifting her to humanity was Malachur's highly public method of stating that Terrans were scavengers, worthy only of the Empire's broken things. Elias stepped forward. The polished floor offered no resistance to his heavy boots. He looked past the Archon and met Astria's dark, lowered eyes. He didn't see a broken thing. He saw a prisoner waiting for the executioner, stripped of all agency by an empire obsessed with biological perfection. The Terran government accepts this profound honor, Archon, Elias said. His voice carried no echo in the vast room. He made the choice in a fraction of a second, absorbing the insult to secure her safety. Would you swallow an empire's insult to save a single life? Or would the cost of that pride demand a miracle no one saw coming? The diplomatic cruiser cut through the slipstream, putting light years of cold vacuum between them and Lumina Prime. Elias sat in his cramped quarters, the blue light of a highly classified Lemurian medical dossier reflecting off his retinas. The file had been quietly slipped to him by a sympathetic attaché before departure. It contained the exact biological breakdown of Astria's defect. It was a staggering list of hormonal flatlines and chromosomal blockages. According to the absolute doctrine of Lemurian science, her reproductive cycle had simply failed to initiate. It was a permanent physiological freeze. Yet, beneath the certainty of the royal medical seal, a secondary set of Terran scan telemetry drifted across his screen. The baseline markers pulled during her boarding physical simply did not align with the Imperial diagnosis. The Lemurian file classified her core system as completely necrotic. The Terran biometric sensors classified it as dormant. Which reading was lying? Elias rubbed the bridge of his nose, feeling a knot of tension tighten in his jaw. He closed the file, the massive discrepancy burning a quiet, nagging hole in his strategic calculations. The mountain retreat on Terra Nova was meant to be a sanctuary. In reality, it was a beautifully constructed observation deck. The sprawling timber facility was ringed by heavy security details and constantly monitored by Lemurian diplomatic observers, all of them waiting patiently for the human experiment to fail. Pine needles crunched under heavy patrol boots outside. The air at this altitude was thin, bitterly cold, and smelled of burning wood smoke. Astria spent her first 3 weeks standing by the reinforced glass in the main living area, staring out at the jagged, snow-capped peaks, as if expecting the landscape to judge her as harshly as her own people had. Elias watched her from the kitchen island, tracking the subtle, anxious tightening of her shoulders. She was broken by their metrics, an evolutionary dead end that, no, not broken, just misaligned with their rigid perfection. He remembered the small, unadorned iron link cuff he had given her on the transport flight over. It was a standard Terran wedding custom, simple and heavy, devoid of the complex circuitry her people favored. He noticed her fingers absent-mindedly tracing the cold metal against her wrist whenever the Lemurian observers walked past the perimeter fence. It grounded her. But the shadow of the medical dossier dictated their daily lives. The Terran government wasn't content to simply house an exiled princess. They needed to understand the biology of the insult they had absorbed. In the retreat's subterranean medical bay, Dr. Eris Thorne set his mug down on the stainless steel lab table. The chipped enamel on the Terran xenobiologist's coffee mug sat in stark contrast as it rested next to the most advanced genetic sequencer in the sector. Eris pulled up the latest comprehensive blood panels drawn from Astria. Lemurian medicine operates entirely on subtraction, Elias, the doctor muttered, tapping the glass screen where 3 distinct protein markers flashed yellow. They look at a biological system that isn't running their specific, optimized code, so they immediately classify it as hardware failure and shut it down. "And what do you see?" Elias asked. He crossed his arms, leaning against the doorframe. "I see a locked door," Eris replied, his eyes narrowing at the cascading walls of scrolling genomic data. "And they completely forgot that humans are remarkably good at picking locks." The tension in the room shifted from diplomatic anxiety to clinical determination. Eris began isolating the dormant hormonal pathways, mapping a rigorous synthetic stimulation protocol that no Lemurian would ever attempt. The 10th month brought the mountain fortress under a suffocating blanket of winter snow and diplomatic paranoia. Above ground, the Lemurian observers paced the perimeter fence in rotating shifts. Their bioluminescent ridges flared and agitated, warning patterns of pale yellow against the white frost, communicating their deep unease without broadcasting a single radio frequency. They had noted the sharp increase in high-grade medical requisition orders over the past several weeks. They had meticulously recorded Astria's expanding caloric intake, the altered, heavier gait of her walk, and the sudden, fiercely guarded isolation of the lower subterranean wards. The human security details had stopped allowing even routine visual inspections. Reports flooded back to Citadel Zenith in tightly encrypted bursts. Archon Malachur demanded total transparency, citing egregious violations of the original marital agreement. He claimed the Terrans were conducting illegal cybernetic augmentations on royal property to artificially enhance her value, attempting to turn a diplomatic joke into a functional asset. He could not fathom the biological alternative. His worldview simply did not possess the structural architecture to imagine a reality where his scientists were wrong. The snow continued to fall outside, burying the sensor tripwires and dampening the sound of the approaching Lemurian dropships that had slipped past Terra Nova's outer tracking network. Elias had known the diplomatic grace period was ending. The Lemurian Empire built its entire cultural foundation on absolute predictability, and Astria's continued flourishing health was a chaotic variable they could no longer ignore. Down in the subterranean medical bay, insulated by 50 feet of solid granite, the air was thick with the scent of antiseptic and heavy anticipation. Dr. Eris Thorne monitored the cascade of green data streaming across the main diagnostic wall, his fingers dancing over the holographic interface. The synthetic stimulation had successfully bypassed the Lemurian hormonal blockades months ago, essentially jump-starting a reproductive system that had been dormant since birth. Astria lay on the central examination table, surrounded by humming monitors. Her breathing was labored but steady. Her skin was glowing with a faint, healthy luminescence that completely defied the grim, finalized conclusions of her imperial medical chart. The Terran medical staff moved around her with quiet, deliberate speed, treating the outcast princess with a level of clinical reverence she had never experienced on her home world. The iron link cuff caught the sterile light of the med bay, a heavy reminder that Elias stopped, his eyes locking on the sudden spike in her vitals. A sharp, rhythmic tone pierced the quiet isolation of the room. It was not a flatline. It was a secondary heartbeat echoing through the amniotic sensors. It was strong. It was rapid. It was unmistakably hybrid. Elias moved to the edge of the table, placing a heavy hand on the metal rail. He watched the fluctuating waves on the monitor. The partial reveal of her dormant biology, the theory Eris had proposed months ago, was now fully confirmed. It replaced diplomatic theory with undeniable, thumping reality. The mountain shook with the force of a localized earthquake. A kinetic strike slammed into the facility's upper defense grid. Malachur had intercepted the leaked telemetry and immediately declared the pregnancy an abomination. Protocol 15 authorized a strike squad to erase the heresy. Sirens wailed. The heavy thud of Terran security boots echoed above as the perimeter was breached. Smoke filtered through the ventilation shafts, carrying the bitter scent of Lemurian plasma weaponry. Elias stood at the entrance. While the Lemurian extremist doctrine demanded the immediate and violent eradication of any biological anomaly that threatened their suffocating illusion of genetic perfection, Elias Thorne simply reloaded his sidearm and securely bolted the reinforced titanium doors of the subterranean delivery ward. The blast doors held firm. The steady, rhythmic drip of a saline 4-bag continued perfectly undisturbed against the chaotic backdrop of the besieged medical bay. Astria gripped the table, her teeth bared in an expression of raw endurance. The Lemurian lie of her necrotic biology shattered in a final, agonizing push. And then, a sound cut through the noise of the bombardment. A harsh, wet cry. Eris held a small form wrapped in thermal foil. The infant's skin shifted seamlessly from Terran warmth to undeniable Lemurian gold. Elias lowered his weapon. He looked at the impossible bridge between two species. They had not just survived an assassination attempt. They had permanently rewritten an empire. Hours later, the galactic broadcast bypassed Citadel Zenith's firewalls. Astria stood tall before 1 billion viewers, her daughter resting securely against her chest. The iron link cuff rested prominently on her wrist. It was no longer an anchor to manage her fear, but the unyielding symbol of a newly forged dynasty. The Empire watched their miracle breathe,